What's up, everybody? My name is Ryan Thomas. Thank you so much for joining me once again on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. Coming to you live from One Buffalo, New York. Big day today for me. I just left the massage parlor, whatever you want to call it. Parlor. I don't even know if that's still a thing. Do they still even call it that? I don't even know. I just left, got a massage. My back feels fantastic. Years of wrestling, years of football, years of baseball at the age of 26 are starting to catch up to me. It might have something to do with the dad bod. That's to be determined. But nonetheless, back on the podcast to talk UFC, MMA. Obviously, today's a big day as well. It's the first day of the Buffalo Bills football season. First preseason game at New Era Field. The Carolina Panthers head into town to take on the Bills in their first preseason game this season. I will be in attendance. And I'm also going to post another video in regards to the Bills on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast Facebook page. So tune into that. Nevertheless, let's talk about the subject matter. Jon Jones, it's all good in the neighborhood for Jon Jones. Everything is sunshine and rainbows for this guy. I have heard, and I stay in the loop with this sport just like I do with football, if not more. I stay in the loop with this sport. I have heard that it is going to be all good for Jon Jones very soon. What I mean by that is, originally we thought that Jon Jones might have a 4-year suspension, which he'd be suspended for 4 years. We would have, a lot to really just ponder in terms of Jon Jones' career, what could have been, all that stuff. His career was going to be lost due to the positive suspension or the positive test, which he tested positive for Turinabol. And it's appearing as if Jon Jones, it's all good for him. I think that Jon Jones is going to be back fighting very soon, fighting inside the UFC cage, fighting inside of Madison Square Garden. There are a lot of rumblings out there right now in terms of Jon Jones coming back, fighting in the main event at UFC 230, November 3rd. Now, we know what the co-main event is. We know that Nate Diaz is fighting Dustin Poirier. We know that that is the co-main event, but we don't have a main event yet, which has left most to suspect that Jon Jones will indeed be fighting at UFC 230, and I think he will be. The court was very lenient with Jones. There was one of the, I don't know what the legal term is, but one of the representatives in the court was very tough on him. She turned the tables on him, roasted him in front of everyone, and pretty much was able to expose things that moments prior to that he lied about. She exposed the fact that he was lying, which I thought was very interesting. They asked him a series of questions, A, B, C, D, E. He lied on B, C, and D, and he was exposed for it. And yet, the court came to the realization that this guy is just too goddamn talented to be kept out of the cage. The fans of MMA are being robbed. That is the conclusion that they are coming to, and that is the conclusion that most fans are coming to. That there is a reality that USADA has almost been just as bad for the UFC as they have been good. Fighters back in the day could take whatever the heck they wanted and then some and fight in the UFC. But as of 2015, that no longer applied. It's robbed us of seeing Jon Jones. It's robbed us of seeing Anderson Silva and plenty of others. Now, I feel like the fighters should fight clean, but when you bring in a sanctioning body like USADA, that or drug testing body like USADA, you're bringing the dogs, you're bringing the greyhounds, the greyhound buses to run over the fighters that are going to be testing positive. You're bringing in the man, the myth, the legend known as Jeff Nowitzki, who You look him up on Google. Google him. I'll give you 3 names that he brought down. Barry Bonds, Lance Armstrong, and Jon Jones. So 3 massive names in their respective sports. A-Rod as well was another one. So, two massive names in one sport, Bonds and A-Rod, he was able to bring down on a positive test, on a traced positive test. Jon Jones is his latest victim, and Brendan Schaub refers to him as the Golden Snitch, which I would say that's a hell of a nickname. And Jeff has brought down Jon Jones, but to say the least, I'm very excited to see the realization that, Jon Jones needs to be fighting. I really don't care about these guys' personal lives. I'm a fan of the sport. I care about these guys fighting, being healthy, being active, and competing inside the cage. That way it gives me something to talk about on this podcast. That way it gives me something to write about on myfantasysportstalk.com. That way it's all sunshine and rainbows. It's all good for me when these guys are fighting, and it's all good for them as well because they're getting paid for their athletic talent, physical talent, whatever you want to call it. Jon Jones needs to be fighting, and I think everybody is coming to the realization that the rules are a little bit strict. To say that a fighter can't take an Ambien, to say that a fighter can't take an Advil, to say that a fighter can't take Mucinex, to say that a fighter can't take ibuprofen, whatever you want to call it, basic over-the-counter medication, that is ridiculous. That's where the line needs to be drawn. Now, performance-enhancing drugs, steroids, human growth hormone, things of that nature, that's what, is should be considered the problem. And Turinabol is a steroid, which is what Jon Jones tested positive for. But it was a very, very, very small trace amount, which Jon Jones was tested positive for. So, that being said, what are we really doing here? We're punishing this guy for a trace amount, which could be easily tainted. And this has happened before, and it's very tough to say, this is a tainted supplement. But I would lean towards that when it's a very small trace amount, to the point where it's, you put your pointer and your thumb finger together, and it's and raise your pointer finger up a little bit. It was that much of an amount in the system, and USADA was able to catch it because of the best governing drug testing body in the world right now. I think if Jon Jones is out of the woods, is going to come back, is going to make a return to the cage, I believe the opponent that best suits him would be one of these 3 guys. I'll give you 3 guys. First would be Alexander Gustafsson. It was one of the greatest light heavyweight title fights ever. I thought Gustafsson won the fight. Jones barely came out on top. Came out of that octagon very beat up, to the point where he had to be carried out of the octagon. Gustafsson gave him everything he could handle and then some. He took him down. He punched him a lot in the first 3 rounds. Jon Jones really started to kick it up into gear in the 4th, 5th round. I thought it was a 3-2 fight for Gustafsson, to be fair. I want to see that fight again. And I want to see it for the vacant light heavyweight title. I want to see the UFC strip Daniel Cormier and put that belt up on the line back for Jon Jones. Daniel Cormier is never fighting at 205 again, folks. I've said that. The moment he won that heavyweight belt, it'll never happen. Daniel Cormier is a heavyweight. Daniel Cormier was born to be a heavyweight, not a light heavyweight. Then, another fight that I think makes the most sense as a main event, once again, for a light heavyweight title, be Jon Jones versus Anderson Silva. Two fighters coming off suspension, coming back to fight for the top prize. Obviously, they're two of the best fighters in the history of the sport, going head-to-head. Tell me you would not want to see that fight. I'll stop there. You do want to see that fight. Whether it should have happened 3-4 years ago and they were both champions or not is another story. But you want to see that fight. And third, the last option on the list, I think, is a third fight with Daniel Cormier for the heavyweight title at UFC 230. If Daniel Cormier wants to fight a money fight again, winner fights Brock Lesnar. I think that fight probably won't happen because Daniel Cormier doesn't want to ruin the Brock fight. But maybe Daniel Cormier will take it because he always wants that next crack at Jon Jones. Now, I offer you the next fight in line. I mean, if Jon Jones fights Alexander Gustafsson and Jon Jones wins, then that opens up his fight for a heavyweight title. Jon Jones fights Alexander Gustafsson and loses, it opens up a heavyweight career for Jon Jones. Jon Jones versus Anderson Silva as the main event at Madison Square Garden would do very well in terms of pay-per-view buys. And that's what we're talking about here, guys. Everybody, casual people that aren't really hardcore fans, I get it. They think that there should be a hierarchy, a structure, a ranking in which the UFC abides by. But the UFC abides by one metric, one number, and that is pay-per-view buys, PPV buys. That's what this is all about. It's always going to be about that. When it was proven that Mike Tyson was a pay-per-view draw, it changed the landscape of combat sports forever. And it's never going back, folks. Despite the fact that the ESPN and the UFC are in cahoots and they've merged, they still need pay-per-view buys. They still need their stars. And their stars are, one of them was, be Ronda, Conor, George, Brock, and Jon Jones. They've tried to elevate Daniel Cormier, but we can obviously see the pay-per-view numbers. Go on UFCbuyout.com or something along those lines. You'll see the pay-per-view numbers for Stipe and Daniel Cormier. They did not do that well on that pay-per-view. And that was a champion versus champion fight, two of the best fighters in the sport today, fighting head-to-head and for the heavyweight strap. Did not do very well. And we can talk about how we don't think Stipe Miocic is a draw. Daniel Cormier was just in a fight with Jon Jones. Daniel Cormier has fought on big cards before. UFC 200 against Anderson Silva. And he's still not drawing without Jon Jones. That's why DC needs this fight with Brock Lesnar to get over the top, to get paid. Not that DC hasn't made good money. He definitely has. But this is help him get paid, as I like to say. So Jon Jones, everything is looking good for Jon Jones right now. He's training actively. Something is in the works. I am fully convinced that something is in the works with Jon Jones. He has a very good relationship with Dana White. It looks like that is repaired. I think he's going to headline UFC 230, whether it's against Alexander Gustafsson, whether it's against Anderson Silva. Anderson Silva is now off of his suspension with a rumored return for October or November. I think there's real legs to this, guys and girls. Stay tuned for more from the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. I'm Ryan Thomas. I'm going to give you guys my players to watch tonight. The Bills preseason game momentarily. Tune in. Keep those eyes open. Whether it be on Facebook, on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast Facebook page, or Twitter at Thomas Takeover, or on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast YouTube channel. Take care, everybody. Let's go Buffalo. Big game tonight. First preseason game. Woo!